Hi, welcome to a musical soliloquy, episode 5. My name is Steven, and here I am with my co host, Zach.
Hi, today we'll be discussing various different pieces and composers, each exhibiting a different facet of virtuosity. Virtuosity is defined as great technical skill or a captivating personal style. And with that being said, who better to start with than Paganini? Stephen, why don't you kick things off?
Yeah, so we have to discuss Paganini with virtuosity because basically he wrote some of the most virtuosic pieces and most technically difficult pieces for the violin. And I thought maybe we could start with his caprices for solo violin. He wrote 24 violin caprices, and each of them represent difficult technical skills on the violin that you can achieve. It's just starting off from the first caprice, there's the hard ricochet bowing there, and also some crazy fast thirds and some high positions there. And it's always so hard because I felt like I could play that caprice except the ricochet. So just getting the ricochet to be exact every single time I recorded it was so difficult.
That totally makes sense. I feel like the hand positions are so awkward with that Caprice too. There are some of those places where you have to stretch your two to where your one it usually is, and just all sorts of weird configurations.
Oh yeah, yeah, you really have to be on your feet and just you need to have quick switches for sure. What makes that caprice so special, I think, is the ricochet bowing across four strings, which is just so difficult to master.
I totally agree. I feel Ricochet for me is a lot easier when it just happens on one string or two strings. As
Yes.
soon as soon as you're going across all four and then coming back, it's really easy to just miss one note. Yeah.
Yeah, and in particular that one, it's hard to you go bum 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 bum. The eighth note of those eighth notes is the hardest to make clear, and so
Wow.
making sure that it's really like that is difficult.
Yeah, some people are really able to make it pop out so clearly. It's kind of amazing. I feel like whenever I try playing that Caprice, I'm not impressed with the way that I play it because it just not every note feels like it pops with clarity. And I
Yeah,
wish I had that. Yeah.
yeah, that caprice is hard because it's actually a little easier when it's faster, but if you want to make it nice and perfectly even, a little bit slower, it's harder. So some people
Mm,
play it crazy fast, like Roman Kim, and it's almost not as hard to get the ricochet, but he still makes it so clear. I don't know how.
I don't know. I mean, it's amazing. It's also difficult musically somewhat because the whole thing is basically chords. Like if you just block it, it's just chord after chord, and then you have some thirds, which is basically just a scale, and
Yeah.
then you have some more chords. So it's kind of interesting that it's so great to listen to. I think there are a lot of interesting things that people can do with timing. But then I also feel that some people who listen to Paganini are impressed when people take very little time because that means that you're really super solid with all your changes. Because I know when I play Paganini, sometimes I like to take a little time when there's something especially difficult, and of course, trying to make it musical.
Yeah, that caprice is one of the shortest caprices. I think it might be the shortest. So,
Wow.
it's over it in so fast because it's rapid fire, just crazy technique. So that's a really memorable one. I remember when I first heard it, I was like, I really wanted to play that one. Besides probably number 24, which maybe we can talk about now. Paganini Caprice number 24 is probably the most famous caprice. It's been transcribed to so many instruments, but of course we love it on the violin. That one is just so hard because there's certain variations in it that just never feel like you can really have a grasp at it. It's like, okay, here we go. And then it's like, yeah. What's your experience
Yeah.
with that one?
Well, I played Paganini 24 for many years now, and I
Yes.
and I feel like I should have mastered it by now, but unfortunately, I don't feel like it is mastered. I totally agree with what you're saying in terms of the variations being difficult to master because even though it is just basically two or three lines of every technique, alternating between techniques for every variation is difficult. You have to switch the way that you're thinking about things. But I would say that Paganini 24 is my favorite Caprice because I think that it's cool to have a theme and variations where all the variations are so different. I think there's a lot of musical capabilities there. And I think my one gripe with Paganini Caprices sometimes is that it can be difficult to find your musical voice if it's a caprice where everything is somewhat the same, or a lot of caprices you're doing one technique for so long it can feel like, what do I do that's different that doesn't feel affected or overdone? And then on the other side of things, how do I make it still sound technically virtuosic and impressive and not just like an etude? In something like Paganini, at least for me, it's important to bring out the virtuosic aspect and to show that it actually is difficult. Because if you play it like it's nothing too, sometimes it loses a bit of the character or charm of the piece. When you have a huge run or something extremely difficult, you have to throw a little flair in there to help the audience understand the technical challenges of the piece.
Yeah, well, that's going back to what virtuosity means, right? Because part of it is that it is difficult, and part of it is showing that this is something really amazing, you know? And I think, yeah, if you don't bring that character out, it doesn't quite come through for sure. I agree about all those things you mentioned about number 24. There's just certain variations in it that are just so difficult. For me, it's like the first variation with the flying staccato. I just never feel quite
Mm.
comfortable with that. For most people, it's like one with the thirds and the tenths right there.
Yeah, that one's the one for me. Every time I play that third intense one, I'm like, uh-oh. Because sometimes the thirds are in tune, and I'm like, yes. And then I usually worry less about the thirds, though, because I feel like if you play a thirds a little bit out of tune, it can be forgiven. But when you start the tenths, it's scary because a lot of people slow down. The yum ba da 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 da, yeah. And I wish I could just do it in tempo, but sometimes I feel if I don't slow down, I miss a note or I add too many notes or it's unclear. So I slow down sometimes in performances and I play the last few so out of tune and it's just embarrassing because you're going super slow. It's like you're bringing out the fact that you can't play tense. I'm like, shoot. I think that it's gotten better over the years. And one thing that I recently realized that I thought, why haven't I been doing this all this time? When I practice it, I just practice the bottom finger. I go A one 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 one. I hold the fourth finger there as well, but I don't play it. Oftentimes, the reason that the tenths are out of tune is because the ones are out of tune. Because I think that the four pretty much just goes with the one. As long as your one's in tune, I think it's way easier to have the four in tune. I think it's easier to think about it like that because one of the hardest aspects about playing tenths and playing octaves is that you're literally playing something with one finger. I mean, it'd be ridiculous if you tried to play a theme or anything with just one finger. When you're playing tenths or octaves, you are playing with one finger plus another finger locked into a position, basically. So that's one of the hardest aspects of octaves and tenths. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think about that, but it's definitely true that it's literally like imagine playing any piece with one finger, like opening up Tchaikovsky, just like going up in there.
Actually, this is just a funny thing, but I realized this when I was playing Waxman's Carmen Fantasy, and there's this theme that's really nice in harmonics, artificial harmonics, the ya da 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 ya da ya da 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 da. And I just kept thinking, why is it so? Every time I play this theme, it's not beautifully phrased. I'm like, this is a beautiful melody. But when I'm playing it, it just sounds so bad. And I kept thinking, why is this so hard to phrase? And then I realized, wait, because of the artificial harmonics, I'm literally trying to play a melody with just one finger. So I had to practice the whole melody like without the harmonic with just one finger, and then it made so much more sense to me in terms of how to phrase it and why it was so difficult to begin with.
Yeah, that's a good practice tip right there for all wanted to know. But yeah, I totally agree. I think having that base of that first finger, especially in like tenths or octaves, is really good and just starting from the base. Although when I'm teaching and when you learn hand position for basic 1, 2, 3, 4, I always teach start from the four because that is where your hand frame really comes from. But yes, when you're actually working on playing it melodically and the tune, it's good to start from the bass up. And one thing that one of my older teachers, Gerardo Ribeiro, mentioned about virtuosic passages, I remember I was playing the Saint-Saëns Zizai Etude Caprice, and that is quite virtuosic. And there's
Mm,
some big runs there too. And I remember him telling me at Meadowmount that, it's okay if some notes in the middle are not in tune, but make sure you start basically in tune and then where you end up is in tune. And I thought that was really good advice. And I think that goes for just in general when you're performing. You want to
I
make sure your
agree.
starts of pieces are good. You want to make sure the ending's good. And
Yeah.
actually, my dad would tell me you want to make sure the special moments in the piece itself really come out because an audience member, it's hard for them to be engaged for the whole duration of like a 15, 30-minute piece. But if they can remember certain moments of it, then it really has a bigger impact. So really bring those out. But
It's
going
true.
back to that tip, I think it's so helpful for these big passages to make sure that you know what you're doing at the end. And if you need
Yes.
to skip through a little bit the middle, I think that's totally fine.
I think it's okay. And I actually think that if you start strong and you end strong, the chances that the middle will be strong too is much higher. It sounds bad if you do a huge run and the last three or four notes are super out of tune, just like what I was talking about with those tenths.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
even if your tenths aren't perfect, but the last few are just in tune, then you feel so much better inside when you're listening to something like that. And you feel better as a performer too.
Yeah.
At least I got a couple.
Going back to Paganini Caprice 24, it is just so hard. I'm thinking about that third variation with the octaves, the beautiful singing
Mm-hmm.
melody octaves. And then
Mm-hmm.
right after that, variation 4 amps up a little bit, and then 5 has jumping octaves. And it's just so hard because you're going from flying staccato to beautiful singing melodic octaves, which are really hard to play in tune. And then you've got, crazy tense, and then later on, you've got left hand pizzicato. It is one of the hardest, despite maybe one variation not being the hardest out of anything.
That's true. Well, I'm thinking maybe it'd be fun to just go through the whole thing since you mentioned all these variations and just give a short practice tip or suggestion on each variation. And I'm not really qualified to do this because I don't think my Paganini is that good. But having played it for a while, I feel like I figured certain things out that I wish I would have known when I first started playing the Caprice. So I
Sure.
feel like even from the theme, I think that it's really important to give it a lot of character because what I notice listening to this piece a lot, and as you mentioned, a lot of people play it on different instruments. Whenever I hear someone on the piano play Paganini, because of the nature of the piano, they play it very differently, and the notes have this nice resonance to them. Yum, 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 especially the yum. Those notes always feel like they have a huge lift to them and resonance that I find often on the violin. It feels like yum ba da 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 yum ba da 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 da. It can feel a little awkward right at the opening. That's one of the things I realized first when I listened to the piano version. So many pianists start with virtuosity and character right from the opening. I think from a violinist perspective, it's like, okay, this is a cool theme, but I'm not worried about this. I'm worried about everything that's to come. But I think that if you lose the audience right at the beginning, it can be difficult to gain them back, even with a difficult virtuosic piece like Paganini. One small parallel in comparison I want to mention is I recently went to a comedy show and I thought that was really fun. And this just kind of goes along with the aspect of personality and a captivating personal style in relation to virtuosity. Because with comedy, once you get the audience laughing at the beginning, they're more likely to continue laughing throughout your set. But there were certain comedians that allowed the laughter to fizzle out by saying some jokes that maybe weren't so funny or changing the mood up. And as soon as people stopped laughing, it was so hard to get people restarted into laughter. And I think it's the same with the performance. If you keep the audience engaged throughout, it's much easier actually to keep an audience member engaged throughout than it is to allow them to lose attention and then try to win them back. Because once you're zoned out, you're zoned out. So I think right from the very first moments of this caprice, it's really important to do something interesting with your phrasing because after all, this is the theme. If the theme isn't that great, then why would you want to hear however many variations there are on that theme?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned all those things because how you start is super important. Sets the tone for sure. I do agree that you want to phrase that theme in a way that is compelling because it is probably the most important statement out of the whole piece, honestly. This first variation is hard for me, so I don't know if I can give the best tips, but I would say, first of all, you gotta get the left hand in order and doing it without the staccato, right? First, just doing it
Mm,
slurred and then doing it separate and getting all the string crossings in order and making sure your right arm is crossing fluidly. And then I personally did a different bowing, so it's not all ups. I would go bum 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 bum, so I could do less flying
oh,
staccatos if that works for you. But I think you just have to practice that bowing like on open strings a lot, and then just doing it with the actual notes and breaking it up and just really grouping it a lot.
I think that's really great advice. For some reason, flying staccato is one of the things that I feel is not easy for me, but I feel very comfortable. And I don't know why, because staccato doesn't feel so comfortable to me, but
Oh.
the flying uppo staccato feels very good. It feels fun to me. I almost feel like I'm flying a little bit. One of the hardest things that you touched on is clarity. And one thing that I notice is your arm likes patterns. And a lot of the time I notice when I play that first variation, it ends up being unclean because my string crossings are not precise. Sometimes for one note or two notes, because it changes which strings you go to, sometimes my arm just stays on a particular string or is in between a string, and that affects the clarity with the uppo. I think for me, it's all about the initial impulse of the yum when once I start the uppo, so I almost think of the up bow being a reaction to the down bow. So it feels like one motion. And what makes it harder for me is when I try to think of every individual note, like the yum, bup, 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 yum, bup, 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 bup. As soon as I start doing it that way, it can help clarity sometimes. So there are certain ones, like if I really want it to be clear, like the yum, da, 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 da. If I really want one of them to be clear, I might take the effort to accentuate every note and bring it out. But typically, I think that it's easier to think of it as a sweep.
It should be for sure, and that helps you group it. It's always important when you group notes to emphasize the first note and have the other notes be a reaction off of it. And so that absolutely
Mm.
goes there. I think flying staccato is a really hard technique that sometimes you just have to develop your technique further and it might come later
That's
on down the
true.
line.
When I was talking to Mr. Laredo about technique and things like that, I was saying, well, I feel like my staccato's not that good. And he was like, you can always do things separate, Bo. I feel like it's funny because to him it just wasn't a big deal. To me it was like, oh my God, I can't do staccato very well. But what's interesting is I feel if you just keep trying to do something and you keep trying to do it different ways, sometimes you'll just find something that really works for you. Because when I was younger, the only way that I would do staccato is I'd really tense up my arm and I'd press into the string really hard and I go and it was just that was the only way that I knew how to do staccato. And still sometimes I resort to that if I'm doing down bow staccato. I feel like down bow staccato for me is a little more tense than my up bow staccato. But still, I feel like I've found a place where I feel really comfortable with up bow staccato now and a lot of different techniques just because I've tried thinking about why things are difficult and what I can do physically to change. One of the things I used to do a lot was I would just do the same thing physically over and over and over again, assuming that one day it would just work out and feel comfortable. But that's what they say the definition of crazy is to, just do the same thing over and over and expect something to change. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, your technique always evolves, I think, throughout as you change, as you grow. Now we're lucky that we're basically settled into where we are. But I just feel like, yeah, I also was taught that one way is to really tense up for staccato. And I think that works when you're younger, but when you're older, somehow your muscles might be a little different. You're able to isolate it a little bit more into just your upper arm and your wrist, maybe.
Mm.
And you're able to have more control over the staccato in that way. Maybe we can jump to variation two. I think this is
Oh
probably
yeah.
the easiest variation out of the whole caprice because it's basically just some string crossings and just making sure you phrase it nicely, I think.
That's true. I do agree it's probably the easiest variation, but I do think that it's underrated in terms of difficulty because I used to just think, oh, whatever, I don't even need to practice this one. And then I listened to myself play and it wasn't very clean. And I started thinking about string crossings a lot because string crossings are actually difficult. When you go from one string to another, for instance, A to D, there are different places on the A string that you can angle your arm or your bow. And I realized that before I was very near the E string when I played the A string, and then when I went over to D string, I was very near the G string. And I thought, I wonder why I'm doing that. So this variation became so much easier for me when I tried to minimize the motion between the strings, and I play the A string very close to the D string and the D string very close to the A string. So I feel like I barely move my hand when I'm doing these string crossings. And for some of them, if you really want a huge wave motion, then you can move your arm more. And it's kind of nice because texturally you feel like you're going from these small waves to these larger waves. And I think it's a really interesting variation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I totally agree. I didn't want to make it sound like it was so easy for me or anything. I
Oh,
totally
no, no,
think
no.
that it is hard, but anything is hard. But I do agree that hopefully you had a teacher tell you that if you're doing rapid string crossings, you should cross as little as possible and use your upper arm. At least that's what I teach. I hope no teachers
Mm.
out there telling you to do this if you're string crossing
Well, I don't think
quickly.
any teacher told me to do that, but I was just doing that because I was not that good, I think.
No, no,
Yeah.
no. I mean, it's something you have to be reminded, I think, to keep your elbow basically still and when you're doing that. So that definitely helps a lot. I think this touches on another topic about elbow height and violin playing because it's something
Mm.
that is not talked about enough, I find. There's
Hmm.
actually so many different ways you can play on each string, depending on your elbow and the tightness of your hand and just exactly what you're doing. It just is so varied. There's so many infinite possibilities. This is really where the magic happens for violin playing and the control of the right arm. So,
Wow. I
yeah.
agree. And that's actually interesting that you bring that up because, in your opinion, is it better to have a higher elbow position or a lower elbow position? Because you watch some of the greatest violinists and they have quite a high elbow position, but I think it depends on so many variables like your bow hold and
Yeah.
how you produce sound.
So that's a really good question. That's something I've been thinking about recently because I think as my body has changed, as I've grown older, I've changed certain things. When I was younger, I was smaller, I was skinnier. I was taught that basically my arm and my right elbow should be quite low. That's basically how I was always taught. And it was kind of the Galamian thing of having the elbow weight always coming down and playing like this.
Hmm.
But I realized later on that I didn't really have a lot of control when it was super low. And now I have it a little bit higher and not crazy high, but a little bit higher because when you approach the string from a slightly higher position, if this is a string and you're approaching it from here, you have actually leverage to pronate the bow a little bit this way to the left. And also,
Mm.
you're approaching the string from a higher angle and more to the left of the string. And so you're
That
actually
makes
able to
sense.
draw a bigger sound and a more intense and bright sound. And especially for solo playing, I think it's really important to be able to do that. Because I find that now when I just have my elbow low here, it's just kind of a nice sound, but I don't get a lot of variance in the colors. So right now I'm having it a little bit here, and also I have a lot more control because I feel like I'm using more of my bigger muscles connected to my back. I feel that when I'm just kind of low, like how I was taught, I'm not able to control it. When I get on stage,
Mm.
I revert automatically back to this.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I actually teach all my students to let the weight of the arm lead the bow because I actually play with a pretty low elbow position, I would say overall. And at least for me, it always feels like I can get leverage into the string. But I noticed the reason I asked this is because I know that you've been experimenting lately, and I was super impressed by how great you sounded with your higher elbow position. I think you're able to draw out such a beautiful sound. Seems like you have so much control over the shaping. It's really nice. And do you think that your stature plays a role in your posture at all? Because for people who don't know, Stephen is very tall and you have very long arms. Because there are people like Misha Elman, who I think was not a large guy, and he plays with a quite high elbow position as well, if I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, man, I can talk for ages about this, and this is like what I'm too much obsessed with, honestly, because I think about it too much in my own playing. Yeah, I'm a taller guy. I actually don't have like super long arms for my height. I have like normal arms, but just, I'm a bit taller. I feel like if you're a smaller person and you're like a little skinnier, I feel like you have to use natural weight. You have to use more of the gravity of your body and just using your full body to get the sound out just because you lack power. I think that that works really well for a lot of people. I notice a lot of violinists are on the skinnier side that do that. But for me,
Mm.
and also for you, we're slightly bigger guys, and we have more muscle mass here. And actually, if we were to just go into the violin like that, I feel I have less control actually because I actually need to like restrain and hold up a little bit the mass to control it better. And so that's why I feel like that doesn't really quite work and I'm a little bit more supported upright like that.
Mm.
As for why Misha Elman has such a high elbow, that's partially because back then the Leopold Auer school, a lot of them used this Russian bow grip, which I actually
Oh,
experimented with as well actually last summer. I always wanted to try it before, but never really did. Last summer I actually literally went like all out and I tried
wow.
it for a little bit. And with that position, you basically need to have a higher elbow because you're getting your weight from actually pronating into the string this way.
That's so
And
interesting.
so it's kind of extreme, but for some people it works, but not most people. I don't think it works for most people nowadays, but
Wow.
to pronate a lot. Basically, it's a scale. You can be very Franco-Belgian and very much this way,
Mm-hmm.
or you could be completely the opposite. I
That's
find
so
it's best
interesting.
to do something in the middle where you're not completely here, but
Mm-hmm.
you're not completely here either. You basically have leeway, you have ability to sometimes push into the string a little bit from up top and sometimes use natural weight. I find that it's a different type of sound. Richard Aaron talked about it in a video where actually the violin string, there's so many different ways to approach it. You can approach it playing kind of from the left side or also from the right side. And I find on the right side of playing, you use more kind of your elbow weight because when you drop your elbow, naturally the supinating motion is you play more on the right side. It draws out a more kind of warmer color, not so bright, and maybe a little bit more depth to the sound.
Mm-hmm.
But when you play with the more pronated sound, you get much more angled and direct and bright sound and harsh sound.
I completely agree, actually, because I think with the Russian bow grip, you hear violinists like Heifetz or Michael Rabin, a lot of these older violinists, not to say that their sound isn't warm, but it feels laser focused. And even though Oistrakh used a Russian bow grip, when I watch him play, it feels like he's always pulling the sound rather than pushing. I like the feeling of pulling the sound out of the instrument because to me, it feels that it maximizes the resonance of the string. Even when I watch my strings vibrate, I feel like they vibrate way more when I'm pulling the sound versus when I try to get on top of the string and I push. Sometimes I'll do that when I'm really looking for a sound that pierces and it feels like it's less circular. There are waves of sound and then there's just like one laser beam of sound. And it's interesting how those differ.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know if Oistrakh has a Russian bow grip. It's certainly somewhat Russian school. I think he has
Hmm.
like an amazing bow grip. It maybe looks a little Russian, but I don't think his index finger is over the second
You're
joint of a
right.
bow.
You're
It's
right.
definitely not like Heifetz, but you're totally right in that Oistrakh, he draws out the sound with so much resonance. I think it's just a balance, and you have to find what works for your body and your arm.
Hmm.
But being able to do both, I think, is important of having that directness and that resonance because basically some teachers that I studied with growing up, I was always taught to be super low and just using like this type of weight. But I found that
Hmm.
that didn't quite work. And this is why I feel
Mm.
like it's so important to study with different teachers sometimes because some teachers just tell you kind of the same thing and it doesn't necessarily work for you. Not to talk about Ty Murray all the time, my former teacher, but she was so big on being able to do different types of bow positions. She talked about pronating and arm weight a lot based on what types of colors you want to make.
I think that's amazing. And I do think that you're totally right. And every teacher is limited by their own experience because obviously it's difficult to teach something that you haven't tried yourself. And that's why I think when I teach, I focus on trying to help students get the sound that I know how to make best. But you're right, every student is very different, and it's important to be innovative as a musician yourself so that you're able to teach students different things. That's one thing I always admired about you, Steven, because you're never afraid to try new things, to try new setups, to take away the shoulder rest and angle the violin differently, to change hand positions and bow. I think it's so brave to go and try the Russian bow grip when you've been not doing the Russian bow grip your whole life. That's a very different thing. It's
Yeah.
wildly different. Yeah.
It was wildly different. Actually, when I played the Bartok Violin Sonata, I completely just used Russian for that concert. And it worked fine,
Wow.
but it actually like it works. The crazy thing is you can make anything work. It's just what fits you the best ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I definitely spent a lot of time in. That's like both a strength and a weakness for me because I'm very open minded and I want to learn as much as I can about the different ways of playing. But the downside is when I'm actually performing, sometimes I'm not exactly sure what really works. And so I'm kind of just stuck doing and being a little bit uncomfortable. And that's something I've struggled with throughout the years.
Mm.
But I feel like the more time and the more patience and the more that I'm learning, I'm able to find what is working more. And I found that it's just a little bit unique the way that I approach the instrument. And I think it's fine because a lot of these great violinists play with such unique postures. So I think it's
It's
totally
true.
fine.
I mean, I just wanted to mention really quick, you sent me a video just a few days ago, I think, where Cavacos actually changes bow grips in the
Yes.
middle of his performance and for a different sound. I thought that was really interesting.
He's someone, I think the first person I've ever seen literally change the bow grip in the middle of a performance. And he also has a very unique posture. But he basically always used a Russian grip. But then now he's experimenting with a Franco Belgian grip sometimes. The Russian grip is, again, very good for clarity and directness. But when you want a bit more weight, it's just really hard to get weight there. And so I think he's just experimenting. I heard he's really into bows. He's fascinated with bows. I think just constantly learning about the arm and how you produce sound is a fascination that all string players should have.
It's true. All right. Well, that was a massive tangent. I guess let's go let's go back to Paganini. I guess we're on the third variation now, the the octave variation. I mean, I would have the same recommendation that I had for the tenths. If you're able to phrase the first finger, then you'll be able to play this variation very well. In my opinion, if octaves are out of tune, it's usually because the shifting is not accurate on the first finger. And I think that anybody who is struggling with 1/4s needs to practice more octave scales, because if you practice scales and octaves, then your 1/4 will be very consistent. If your one's in tune, your four will automatically be in tune. So I would say if you notice that your problem is that your ones and fours are out of tune, then you might be better served practicing scales in octaves. And then whenever something's out of tune, you'll be able to immediately diagnose the problem as it was my one, instead of having it be the spacing between the notes.
Yeah, well, octaves are really hard because there's both the space in between and where you're at. So it's like double
Mm-hmm.
trouble, if you want to call it that. I think it's good to practice with one, though when I teach octaves and hand frame, again, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's important. The way I was taught is the fourth finger stays in a constant position. You don't want to be adjusting it too much. And then the one is the finger that
Mm.
adjusts. So when you go down to first position, the one reaches back more. And then as you climb up the fingerboard, the four basically stays the same, but you're just moving the one.
I actually agree with that. When I think about it, I do keep the four pretty consistent, and I move the one because it's way harder to move the four around.
Yes.
But I think sonically, I'm always thinking about where the one is. If you practice octaves, I think that your one gets used to moving around like that. I think that variation is a collection of random octaves, and you have to know exactly where these octaves are. So if you practice octaves going pretty high up on the G string, just 1 4 1 4 1 4 1 4, then I think your mind just kind of knows where everything is. So it doesn't feel scary.
I totally agree. I think we have basically the same idea. One more note about that third variation. I remember Mr. Lipset, I think, was showing us a video of Heifetz playing it. There's this famous video of him playing it, the 24th Caprice, and the vibrato in the octaves was so rich.
Mm.
And that's something I think is extra credit if you can achieve that rich vibrato. What is special about what Heifetz does and great violinists is when they vibrate octaves, the fourth finger is also vibrating. You can see the oscillation there. Heifetz is able to achieve that. And so that's like extra credit. And also really singing it like a vocal piece. And also when you get up high, because it's so high up, to really get closer to the bridge and actually use enough bow speed so that you're not crunching the sound. There's just so many difficult things about that variation.
I totally agree. Yeah, I remember Mr. Lipset asked me to vibrate, and I was like, "Oh, this is so hard." It is hard to vibrate actually. And these days, usually the first time through the variation, I might vibrate ya 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 da da ya da 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 da. But when I repeat, I usually do no vibrato because for me, it feels so comfortable to just slide around with no vibrato. And
Yeah,
so I'm a
yeah.
big fan of no vibrato for that because oddly enough, it's way easier for me to play in tune when I do no vibrato because I feel like I can just hear the intervals so clearly.
Oh, yeah. I think there's different types of violinists. There's some violinists that play with obsessive vibrato, and a lot of their shaping is done through constant vibrato. Someone I can think
Mm,
of is Joseph Silverstein, who
mm.
always has this super intense vibrato all the time. Some violinists shape a lot more with their bow. So I think if you shape more with the bow, you can do less with the vibrato, but still equally effective. I think those two tools, you use them both at the same time, but if you use more bow speed, you can be fine with a little less vibrato inflection. But if you don't do either, it's not good.
Yeah, you're totally right. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently because I think I gravitate towards not using so much vibrato all the time because I just like the sound of certain notes. And sometimes for a passage, there'll be a really important note. Pretty much every teacher that I've ever had is always like, well, you need to vibrate that note because it's the most important note in the passage. But to me, oftentimes I think, well, if I'm vibrating every other note in the passage, because vibrato is kind of default, and this is the most important note, sometimes doesn't it make it stand out more if you don't vibrate it? I think it's a different type of expression that I kind of personally enjoy, but obviously it's not everyone's cup of tea.
That's so funny
So,
that you said it
yeah.
like that. Yeah, I remember you talked about Clara Jumi Kong and how you liked her playing
Yes.
because she has some purity and she doesn't vibrate everything, right?
I really love her playing, and I love how she just leaves notes out. And it's not like she couldn't vibrate every note if she wanted to, but I think that it's very interesting how a note with no vibrato really stands out it affects me in a different way. I feel drawn to that type of sound. I'm like, ooh, that's nice. And I don't know why that is. Versus vibrato, sometimes it's really warm and I enjoy it, but it's almost like a generous helping of chocolate over everything. I like certain notes not having vibrato. Of course, it depends on where it is and how tastefully it's done. I really enjoy experimenting with no vibrato because I think it just changes the timbre of the sound so much. And you can take something that's so warm and then suddenly it feels almost like a crystal. It's like, whoa, this is pure sound. And the string is already vibrating on its own. So I feel that it's not necessary always to add more vibrato on top of that because the vibrations already has its own frequency.
Yeah, I love that. I love the crystal reference right there. I do agree that, again, when you don't vibrate, you can do so much with the bow. And when you're vibrating all the time, you do stuff with the bow too, but the focus can be on the vibrato. And it sounds kind of like a singer that's always constantly vibrating. Whereas sometimes when you think of Gregorian chants, sometimes you don't hear the vibrato at all, and there's
Mm.
something so pure about it. It kind of almost touches the soul in a different way, in a more direct way in some ways. Yeah.
It's true. What I don't like is just mindlessly vibratoing everything. I can feel frustrated sometimes because it's like I leave out notes on purpose. And they're like, well, you should really vibrate this note because it's important. Then I'm like, well, I didn't vibrate it because I think it's important, because every note has vibrato.
That's
But
so great that you're bringing this up because I feel like some teachers just say like, "Oh, you just got to vibrate it." Or a lot of teachers have their ideas about playing and it's like it needs to be this way, and then it's very formulaic the way they teach. And I think there's merit to that, but it doesn't make a lot of sense because if you are your own artist and you want to make your own decisions, you shouldn't blatantly just take what a teacher says and just do it just cuz. Like you should allow that to process through your own thoughts and what you want to say about the music. And if that type of sound draws you, I think it's important to bring that out. And why would you just play just like everyone else just cuz you were told to?
well, thanks, Steven. That makes me feel really validated. So
Yeah.
I
And
appreciate
yeah,
that.
we're getting really sidetracked here. So,
Maybe we can just touch on them as just real quick. The next one I think is kind of interesting. It reminds me of like a spider crawling
oh, yes.
somewhere because it's like creepy crawler feel. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't have so much to say about that one. I think that it's just very chromatic.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about it either. I think it's very pure and exposed, and just make sure you get your fingers real tight. Get those half
Yeah, real
steps.
tight. The next one, I remember the first time I heard this variation played super well was when you played it, Stephen. I was so impressed because,
Really?
yeah, you played this at Colburn, and I remember Lipset asked me to do this crazy thing where he's like lift after every down bow. It was like yum, and then whip the bow da 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 yum, and then whip da 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 da. And I was like, this is impossible. And I didn't really do it because it just sounded so bad. But then I went to studio class and I saw you play Paganini 24 and you had this amazing whip going on. And not only did you have this amazing whip that just made everything so clean, you also really articulated the da-dum, ba-dum. I think that the second octave is so hard to articulate in this one. Ever since then, I've been trying to emulate that. I don't
Oh,
whip the bow anymore because I just get scared that I'll rip all my strings off. But I really tried to articulate that second one like I heard you doing.
wow, that's interesting because you never said that to me. And yeah, I do that, but I struggle with that variation a lot because it's hard to play in tune and it's so awkward. Sometimes I want to whip the bow so hard that maybe it is very clear, but I feel like I don't have full control over it. Maybe it gave that effect to you, and that was,
It
yeah.
seemed incredibly confident. And also, I remember the intonation was perfect. And I it's like, whoa, because that variation is really scary with the yum ba da 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 ba dum ba da 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 yum ba da 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 da. There's just a lot of jumping up and down.
Yeah, I really struggled with when you have to jump up to a high octave for a long time. I have quite narrow
Mm,
fingers,
Mm.
And despite having a big hand and long fingers, my fingers are really narrow. And for a long time, I was really afraid of going up high because, like, it's so easy to miss the finger.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
for a long time, I was scared about that. And that variation, it's really hard because you literally go bump and you jump up, body, and you jump
Hmm.
up again. I think just practicing octave scales really slowly and knowing exactly where it is and just doing it over and over and over again. Eventually, you have to be able to plop down the octave from above and from nowhere. That's what's
Mm.
hard. Because if I go from down
I.
here, it's
Mhm.
not bad.
I actually just slide up on the G string when I do that. I go yum, and then I move my hand, and then I just
Oh,
slide it over to E string. Yada yada. So when I think about it, I think of it as like almost connective tissue. Dum yada 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 ba yada yum ba yum. It's scary for me when I have to jump, and so I usually try to avoid those types of feelings when I can.
that's actually probably a better way to approach it for sure. But you don't have much time there up the tempo, so it's like, yeah,
You
it's
don't, you
hard.
don't. It's mostly like a psychological thing, but just if I think of it like I just gotta find this out of nowhere, it scares me a little bit because I'm like, what position is that? I'm not even sure.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, 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 I don't even know what position that is because the spacing is weird.
Speaking about positions, at a very high level, you don't even think about positions anymore. At least I don't, because you just have to have a sixth sense of where notes are on the
It's
violin.
true, but recently I've started thinking about positions a lot. I haven't thought about positions in forever, and I don't mean to contradict what you're saying. If I'm playing something that's really difficult and I have to just make a jump, instead of thinking about A or B or whatever the note is, I started thinking, okay, 10th position, and then I'm shifting down to second, and then I'm shifting back up to 11th position, and I think in my head like 9, 9.5, 10, 10.5, 11, 11.5. And it's just like it helps me measure the distance almost in my head. When I have a really difficult shift that I keep missing, I immediately say, okay, what position am I shifting to? Like, what's irregular about this shift that's making me miss it? I try to measure that distance from there to there. I'm like, oh, well, this is awkward because I'm shifting 3.5 positions and that's not usually something that happens. Or I'm shifting 6.5 positions and then back down even further, like 7 positions. So I start thinking about that, and for some reason, that's been really helpful for me recently.
Yeah, I didn't think about positions so much, but I did think about the distance between shifts when I was younger a lot. And I
Mm.
still do, and I think it is important. So I think about if it's a half step shift, a whole step, 1.5 steps, two full steps, 2.5, three. When it gets to 3 or 4, you think like a fourth or a fifth shift or a tritone. And then if it's a full octave, then you think octave or a seventh, minor seventh. So
You have great ear training and you have great ear for intervals.
yeah, so
Yeah,
whatever you
that
need,
makes
but
a lot
I
of
do
sense.
agree it is good to frame it in terms of what you're doing exactly. So,
Okay, well, I guess let's move on to the next variation, the thirds.
one tip I always give is whenever a passage is slurred, to play it separate. So you really kind of
Mm.
get the coordination and get each one clear. Obviously, you got to practice a lot of third scales quickly, but making sure also with your bow that you're really prioritizing the distribution, that you have enough bow on each note is important, and how you're shaping it, because it's not just
That's
because
true.
sometimes you have a perfect left hand, but if your bow isn't quite phrasing it, that it's not gonna work either. So
That's true. Do you like start that first note with da, or do you start it like ya ya da da? Do you view this as a singing variation or as an aggressive one?
I think it's somewhere in the middle because I think it needs that virtuosity. I think there's an accent in the beginning, and whenever there's an
Mm-hmm.
accent, I think there should be some sort of bite to it. But
Mm.
it is also very expansive with the bow and lots of resonance. So I would say both.
Yeah, I go back and forth because sometimes I feel like maybe I should go more for beauty of sound, and sometimes I think opposite.
The tenths, you just need good tenths and you need to practice tenths quickly. I
It's
think,
hard
yeah.
because those are irregular tenths in my opinion because tenths in Vinyasa for me are easy-ish. Like I just don't feel like I struggle with them. I feel like,
Mm.
oh yeah, these tenths feel comfortable to me, my hand. But every time there are tenths in Paganini, I think, why are these so awkward? Like I feel like the interval changes. It's very irregular, even though it's basically just a scale. I don't know what it is. I think in Vinyasa a lot of the time the tenths just feel like they match my hand, or I don't know
Interesting.
why. Yeah.
Because yeah, it is basically just a tenth scale. So yeah, I think it's just hard because there's so many, and then you do it on the A and D strings, which is even harder to get the sound.
Even I mean maybe because it's a minor scale, I'm not so good at these minor
Probably,
tenth
maybe,
scales.
maybe, because I know you played the Vignasi Polonaise. It's a major tenth scale up. That's hard too, but you always hit
Yeah,
that. So
that feels much better.
that's
That feels much
interesting
better.
because it's basic.
Yeah.
If anything, I think minor is easier, but I think that one's hard because it's so fast. So you basically need to train the vibrato shifting up because when it's so fast, you can't just shift like this. It needs to be vibrato or almost even a slide. We didn't talk about Paganini 4 yet, but the tenths there are so fast that it's essentially a vibrato, but almost like a slide up and down. And the notes in
Wow.
between almost don't matter so much. The one in Paganini 24 is a little slower, but it's almost basically just sliding up. I would say make sure that the D, F, and third position tenth to the top one an octave higher, practice that distance as like one slide so you know your beginning and end, and then get the vibrato slide up. And you don't have to hit each note perfectly. Obviously, ideally, if you can, practice it, but getting the big picture of really hitting the bottom and the top is going to help you.
Good advice on that. Next variation, this one's kind of fun. I feel so happy once I get to this variation because the tenths are over, and that's the one that scares me. It's just like worry about the tenths. The tenths happen, and whether they happen well or not, then the rest of the caprice, I'm just either thinking like, oh man, I gotta do something about that when I get home. Or, I mean, obviously I try to be in the music, but it's hard not to flag those things in my mind, like, oh, this actually worked this time. I wonder why. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every violinist has been through that. And I think it's important to, one, if something not ideal happens, to just, first of all, just accept it. But then, second of all, to go back and think about how it could have gone better and how you could have increased your chances. And a lot of times it's not so easy. It's not like someone can just tell you or you can really figure out so easily. So a lot of it is just time and more experience. It's not so obvious.
One thing that I've tried too is starting up bow, and that actually I did for a while because that felt better to me. But it's always difficult to do these things in competitions because sometimes jury members will just say, well, you didn't really do what's written here, and I don't like it when people modify.
There's certain things that, I mean, it's always hard, but you find a way eventually, I believe.
You do.
That's something I think Augustin Hadalick does really well. He recognizes that passages are hard, but he has like every possible way of how to avoid having it go wrong. And he's thought about all those things. So
That's true.
the possibilities of something going wrong are like very little with him.
Sometimes when I play Paganini 24 as an encore, if I'm not feeling it, I just skip that variation.
Really?
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
just like, I should do it, I should do it. And then I finish dum ba da dum, and then I just go yum yum ba
That's so funny. I mean, I guess
Maybe
no one
people
will
who
know,
knows.
right?
Well, I'm sure people who know Paganini are like, no respect.
Yeah, the average
Yeah.
person would not know, I don't think. Yeah, I don't have much to say about the next one. I think it's just a little twirly and just have fun with it.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
Pizzicato variation, I think, isn't too bad actually if you've ever done some left hand pits. It's actually not too
Hmm.
bad. I can go on about left hand pits because Lipset trained me a lot on it. You just want to make sure you pitch as loud as possible, and you have to really
Yeah.
use the pad of your fingers and really get the string,
Mm.
really get the meat of your fingers and pluck the string
Yeah.
hard. Yeah.
I really like left-hand pits overall as long as it's not too hard. And this is one of the sections that I really enjoy playing. Some people that I talk to, I think a lot of people have very soft hands and they don't want to cut their fingers, which I understand, or get a blister. Not that you should torture yourself, but I think you should just go through the process of getting a blister on your fingers, like plucking so hard it hurts your hands. And then eventually your hands will just be harder and you'll be able to pluck super loud all the time, which I think is good because pizzicato can get lost in a hall very easily, I think.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I might as well explain what Mr. Lipset taught me with left hand
Love
pits.
to hear.
Yeah, you have to like practice it so that it actually hurts. And I actually was practicing Last Rose of Summer by Ernst, and there's a
Oh,
famous
wow.
arpeggio pizzicato passage there. He literally told me your hand has to hurt, and I actually practiced so much that like I started getting like blood in my fourth finger.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know if
man.
I told
I'm
you,
sorry
and
to
it
hear.
was like kind of bad because it was like just in the nail there, and
Ooh.
yeah, I had to like rest, and eventually it went away, but I was really sacrificing something to get these left-hand
Oh
pizzas.
my God.
But I do agree, it's once you do it more, your finger develops the harder skin, and you need that to get it louder, and eventually it doesn't hurt anymore. And now I can pluck with quite a lot of force, and it's quite comfortable actually. So
That's amazing. Well, I
yeah,
think it's just like training, you know, how they say those kung fu people, they would punch a wall, like a paper to harden their hands. Paper on a wall, basically, like so many
yeah.
times. I even saw this one YouTube documentary where these Shaolin monks had like these nooses and they were just hanging there and they're like, at first you can only do it for a few seconds at a time, otherwise you like, kill yourself.
Mm.
Then these guys were just hanging there on their necks for like 10 minutes. I was like, wow, well, they can't be hung, if, yeah,
Yeah. Well,
it's impressive what the human body can do to adapt.
yeah, I think with left-hand pitch, it's just painful for little while, but you have to make sure your finger joints collapse a little bit and you really get all that speed in there. And it needs to be very loud. It needs to pop out. Yeah.
I think it's one of the most satisfying things you can do on the violin. Do you have anything to say about that chord variation? Do you do that original bowing, the yada yada, yada yada
No,
yada da da?
that variation, I don't have a ton of things to say. I think just make sure that you shape it and that the chords are relatively in tune. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, same. Resonance. What about the last two variations?
That last variation up high for me is hard to play in tune. I think take your time with it because it's slow and you have more time than you think, and really be intentional about every single thing because I know there's random jumps across strings, and whenever you rush it, it just something goes wrong. It's so fragile there.
Yeah, I like that last variation a lot. And I think it's interesting that Paganini marks piano at the last before the end because you'd expect it to just keep getting louder and louder. But
Oh, really? I didn't know you marked piano there.
I believe so. I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that he did.
I guess this episode was basically all Paganini 24.
Oh,
But we talked about so many
oh man.
interesting techniques on the violin, so honestly, they apply to a lot of pieces.
I mean, I think it was really interesting to actually talk about Paganini 24 in so much depth because I haven't really discussed every variation like this before. So it's
Yeah, I
interesting.
mean, that
Yeah,
Caprice, there's so much to talk about. And there is so much to talk about with every Caprice in general, but I'm glad that we were
that's
able to
true.
touch on so many things.
We'll have to title this episode something different. Paganini from 1 to 24, but mostly 24.
Yes, we do. But it does fall under the bracket of virtuosity because it's all hard. It's all virtuosity.
That's true. Okay, I guess with that, do you want to get into our final segment?
Yes, let's jump to our practice tip of the week for this week.
Okay, so my practice tip of the week is actually very interesting because it has nothing to do with practicing.
What is that?
Turn off your phone when practicing.
Okay, that's
That's my
still,
practice
yeah.
tip. Yeah, because actually, this comes from Mr. Lipset, and he said that you should just turn off your phone because if you keep it on silent or whatever, and you even have it in the same room with you, you'll feel tempted to look at it, and it's so true. Whenever I practice with the phone in the room, I'll think that I can focus, and then I see one notification, and I'm like, maybe I should respond to that. And then once you open up your phone, it's hopeless because phones are meant to be addicting. I've had so many times where I'm having a productive session and I'm like, oh, I should look up this fact about this composer or whatever. And instead of doing it later, I'm like, I'll just do it now. And then as soon as I open up my phone, even if it's for a good purpose, technically, I usually end up getting distracted. I get an email while I'm looking at something. And then 30 minutes later, I'm still on my phone. So, yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Stephen?
I agree. I think growing up, I try my best to do that, especially studying with Mr. Lipset days.
Mm,
I think it's really important. Although, as a musician, it can be hard because your phone is important for a lot of things. Responding to emails, sometimes like gigs pop up, and if you don't respond quickly, you might not get the gig. So it's
that's
like you have
true.
to be on top of stuff sometimes. And so nowadays, I do tend to have my phone more around. But also, I think I'm just better at really focusing if I want to. And I
That's
feel
good.
not having the phone there helps, but like even if you have the phone there, I find that I'm able to jump between using the phone for like an actual thing I need it for and
Mm,
also going straight back into my practice. And
I think that's really powerful.
it ends up being my practice sessions are like longer because I'm taking like 5 minute breaks sometimes during the practice session. But it's like if I'm studying a piece of music and I need to look at, hear the recording for something, or I need to look up a fact or, stuff like that. And it's always good to have something there on the side. I find it's all encompassing. I feel like my practice is not just repetition on the instrument, but it's more well rounded. And now I use iPad so much when I practice, actually, all the time. So
Oh,
that's one
wow.
thing. I basically am on an electronic device the whole time. Yeah, if I'm really trying to lock in, obviously, I think you should not use your phone. But I'm just saying that I feel like nowadays everything's so fast and online that it's helpful sometimes to have it there.
I think you're right, actually. And upon further contemplation, maybe that's not the best tip because you're right. A lot of people use iPads these days, and I don't actually use an iPad because I like physical paper, slash, I would probably be too distracted. But yeah.
Oh, but I
Do you
totally
have.
agree because, like,
Mm-hmm.
just if you're younger and if it's a huge distraction, I mean, I think that your practice area should be like it's just your practice, and
Mm.
it's like if you're practicing next to your bed, it's so easy to want to lay on there and just not do anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I typically practice near my bed and for some reason I don't really feel tempted to lie down. But when I practice next to my couch, for some reason I get tempted to lie down.
Interesting.
I'm not sure why.
All right. Well, I'll do my recording recommendation. I thought of Jamie Laredo's Debussy, The Girl with the Flaxen Hair. And this
Mm.
recording is one of the first recordings I heard of Jamie Laredo back when I first discovered him when I was going to Meadowmount because he was a big figure there. Mr. Laredo actually went to Meadowmount 7 times. He
Whoa.
beat my 6 times, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and apparently Mr. Sloman went 11 times.
What? 11 times? Wow. Well, I
Yes,
guess that just goes to show Meadowmount has a stellar reputation, or it's
yes,
left a legacy of reputable violinists.
yes, of course, yeah. Yeah, this recording kind of introduced me to Mr. Laredo, so it is important in some ways, I guess, having studied with him later. I always find that Mr. Laredo has such a sweet vibrato and a sweet sound, and he has a amazing connected phrase, long legato. I don't know how he does it, but it is actually so unique. He loves those short pieces too. And I think he made two recordings of it. One is his debut recording right after he won Queen Elizabeth competition, and
Wow.
one is later on he made a short album of many short pieces. Yeah, just something special about that sound. I think it's the sweetness. It comes in his personality, this charm, and this most beautiful legato singing phrase. Yeah, I just can't recommend that one enough. It's only a 2.5 minute piece, but I think he brings something special there.
That's really incredible. I mean, I love Jamie's sound too, and I feel really lucky that we both got to study with him and get to know him as a person because Jamie's one of those rare people that is genuinely such a nice person. I always felt scared in a way to meet violinists that I really looked up to and admired because if they weren't nice people, then your opinion of them might change just because even if you still enjoy their playing, it's hard to get something like a negative interaction out of your mind. But with Mr. Laredo, it's all just positivity and warmth. And I think his warmth reminds me of maybe the warmth that Chrysler must have had during his life. It really comes through in the sound.
Yeah, I think that's why Mr. Laredo also loves those short pieces so much because he brings out that charm that you can bring out in those pieces. Because in those short pieces, it's not like you can tell this full narrative that a sonata can. And it's really about those special moments, those vignettes. And he's really good at bringing those out. So I thought I'd recommend one of them.
Well, thanks for the recommendation. And I guess that wraps up our episode. Paganini through the ages.
Yep. Thank you, everyone,
Yeah.
for tuning in. And we hope to see you again. Bye.
Bye.